Hey, welcome to Plant Yourself. I'm your host, Howard Jacobson. Two quick announcements before we get to today's show. If you're interested in becoming a health coach, I'm offering another run due to popular demand for people who can't make 8 p.m. on Wednesday nights, Eastern Time. So we're doing another run of the program, which will meet, the practicums will meet at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays, Eastern Time, U.S., which means if you're in Europe or Africa, that might be good for you. Also, if you're in the U.S. and evenings aren't good and you have free time in the mornings, either 7 a.m. Pacific time or 10 to 11:30 Eastern, then you can participate. If you want to find out more about becoming a wicked effective health coach, you can go to wellstartcoach.com. Second thing is, if you're not aware of it, Josh LaJaunie and I have a book that is free on Amazon Kindle. It's called Sick to Fit. And if you just go to Amazon and search for Sick to Fit, you'll be able to download it for free and read it on any Kindle-enabled device, even a phone, smartphone, tablet, computer, whatever. All right, let's get to today's episode. This is the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm Howard Jacobson of plantyourself.com, Well Start Health, and Sick to Fit. This podcast is part of my mission to help you live a courageous and compassionate life. Today's guest is a vegan all-star. It's Colleen Patrick Goudreau, author most recently of The Joyful Vegan, but she's written a whole bunch of other books, and she is one of the most influential and compassionate and effective voices in the vegan community, reaching out to form coalitions, to connect with others, and to present our way of life not as restrictive or militantly judgmental, but as loving, compassionate, and interested in the well-being of all. Her new book, The Joyful Vegan, is not only beautiful and inspiring, it's also eminently practical. The subtitle is How to Stay Vegan in a World That Wants You to Eat Meat, Dairy, and Eggs. And it's full of strategies. It points out the different stages that people tend to go through on their journey and how we can navigate them with skill, grace, humor, and above all, self-compassion. And we'll talk all about that in a bit. Just two quick things right now. One is check out sicktofit.com/retreats. The next one coming up is in North Carolina, June 4th through 7th. And I heard something very important over the weekend, which was not only do we teach by example, as every parent knows, but we also learn by example. So if you've been struggling and you'd like to learn how to eat, how to move, how to think in a way that aligns your daily decisions and actions with your big goals, then come join us. Josh LaJaunie and I have kind of cracked the code, not only on how to do it, but also on how to share it, how to create community around it. So if that's you, if you'd like to make 2020 your year, check it out, sicktofit.com/NC, North Carolina, all lowercase, for that particular retreat. And you can just check out the retreats page for other upcoming ones. Second, a quick reminder that this podcast is supported by listeners, and mostly by myself at this point, and it's free for everyone, whether they can afford it or not. So if you are aligned with the mission of this show and you'd like to show your support, one great way to do so is to go to patreon.com, look for Plant Yourself, and commit to becoming an ongoing monthly contributor. Even $1 a month gets you a bunch of goodies, gets you a shout out at the end of the show, and will make you sleep well at night. All right, so let's get right to it without further ado. Colleen Patrick Goudreau, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thank you, Howard. So good to be here.
It's great to finally meet you, and I want to start with some bonding. So you grew up, I guess, in Livingston?
I did.
I grew up in South Orange.
Oh, how funny. So yeah, I grew up in Summit, but I did move to Livingston, and my father grew up in West Orange. They're from that whole area. And then I went to Seton Hall also for grad school, which is in South Orange.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah.
What did you study?
English literature.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why you keep on in your book defining the roots of terms.
I do love language. I love the English language. I love words. I love etymology. I love putting words together. So yes, it's always been a passion of mine. And I thought I was going to teach literature, thought I was going to be a university professor. And when I was teaching in grad school, I got very jaded very quickly and stopped that notion in its tracks.
I see. Yeah, and I was loving your alternate metaphors to, two birds with one stone,
Yeah.
two carrots with one knife.
Yeah. There's a lot to say. Our language is, obviously, I mean, we can talk about that forever, but the words we use and the language we use, especially to talk about animals or really anything, really has an impact on how we perceive animals, how we treat them. So I think our language is really instrumental, and being mindful of it, I think, is really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure we'll get into that. The other commonality I think we have is, if I'm doing the math right, we both read Diet for a New America in 1990, and it blew our minds.
Oh, that's lovely. I didn't know that. Yes, that would have been 89, 90. That's right. You are a good mathematician. I, however, studied English literature, so I'm not a good at math. But that's right. That would have been at the same time. Yeah, mind blowing, right?
Yeah, and mine was my father died in late 89, December 26th, 89. At that point, I had zero interest in nutrition, health, anything. And for some reason, I was like 3 weeks later, I was in Barnes and Noble, and I saw the spine of the book, and I bought it without knowing why or caring or having ever heard of it. And I read that book, and I instantly went, I guess you would call it whole food plant-based.
Right. Oh, that's so amazing. That's so interesting. I'm sorry about your father. He would have been young, I imagine.
71.
Yeah. So is that what compelled you to pick up a book related to diet, or no?
I don't even know. I don't remember. I mean, the other thing, like what was so helpful. So we're going to be talking partly about your latest book, The Joyful Vegan, and you talk about like all the stages that one might go through in the process of becoming vegan, becoming more vegan, staying vegan, getting challenged. And so I remember reading this book and becoming, a complete evangelist.
Mm-hmm.
It was so easy for me at first to eat this way, to resist all kinds of social pressure, like I was like a superhero. And then it's like, I don't even know what happened, but fast forward 8 years, and I'm arguing with my 2-year-old daughter that she's taking the cheese off her pizza, because you can't just eat the bread and tomato sauce. You got to eat the cheese too. It's like it had never happened.
Interesting.
And I felt like it was a particular kind of crazy that I have, where I can get so excited about something and then like not even notice when it's gone or that it's gone. But you kind of talk about that process, and I felt very normalized by reading your book.
That means everything to me. That's exactly what I wanted the book to do, and we can talk more details, but it literally gives people the words, the names for the experiences that they have, that normalizes it for people. And I can't tell you how many people I have heard from who said, you gave a word, you validated it. Like that I'm going through this isn't crazy, that I'm going through this isn't unique. And that's everything to me, because I think that just enables us to see through that lens of, everybody else is going through this, I'm not alone. And I think that really shifts a lot for people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you're in a very good position to do that service for us, because you're sort of like everyone's vegan auntie, like everyone's confessing everything to you. It seems like from the emails that you print in the book. It's like you get a lot of people's souls bared to you.
I do. It's really, it absolutely feels like a great responsibility. And I think, I didn't expect to, well, I mean, I shouldn't say I didn't expect to write this book, because every time I would get emails from people, it would kind of make me question things and ask more questions and shape narratives around the experiences we were having. And then I would write podcast episodes. So it's been very much a give and take between me and my audience. They didn't necessarily know it. It wasn't necessarily a direct, hey, Betsy wrote me this email and this episode is now based on Betsy, but it really helped shape the way I was thinking about helping other people, navigate this. So yeah, I feel like it is an honor and a great responsibility to be this conduit, like you are, like I think we all are.
All right. And one of the things I really appreciate about your writing is how open you are about who you are. and what you think, that there's a trustworthiness that comes through just what appears to me from the outside to be a lot of self-work, self-reflection. Like, this didn't come easy to you.
Wow, you're very observant. I have done a lot of work. I think we all have work to do, and I try to do my share. And I think that idea, I mean, because again, I always just tell my story, and I think that's a powerful way for people to relate to us, is for us to just tell our story, connecting with people on a narrative basis, again, going back to language, going back to storytelling. And I've never forgotten my story. I've never forgotten that I once didn't know. I've never forgotten that there was a time before I was vegan when I wasn't vegan. And so I think just remembering that has helped me, certainly, I think, stay on course, stay humble, and understand where other people are coming from when they come to me with their stories.
Right. So that's a good segue into your story. I know a lot of listeners of my podcast know it, but some don't. Can you give us your backstory to discovering veganism?
I sure can. I feel like it is certainly not extraordinary in any way. And I think maybe that's why it makes it helpful for people to hear it, because it's very ordinary. And I think it's something most of us can identify with. I was a kid in New Jersey, as you said, in Edison at this time. I was raised in Edison in the first 10 years of my life. And I was a kid who loved animals. I mean, this is kind of the short synopsis. There was a lot more to say about what kind of kid I was, but this isn't the podcast for it. And my parents were supportive in my love for animals, but they were not animal lovers per se. It wasn't like we did anything special and we were all, evolved in that area. I helped animals when I could. I cried very deeply when I saw any kind of animal suffering. Perhaps that might be something that is specific to my story that some people might not necessarily identify with, in that they may not have considered themselves animal people. Like I said, my parents weren't. My sister was not an animal person. She didn't cry the way I did if I saw any kind of suffering or just really any kind of loneliness.
Did that extend to humans as well for you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There was a depth of feeling that I would feel when, I am one of those people who cries when other people cry. There's an empathic response I have. And I do think unless we have some element of sociopathy, I think we all have empathy. I happened to feel it deeply and manifest it. So I wouldn't be afraid to cry, or I did cry, at least I did. And so I tell this story in the book, but it really was, I remember how deeply I cried seeing Benji, which was a movie about a dog. It wasn't about slaughter. It wasn't about, he was just this dog who was on his own and didn't have a family and didn't have a home. And there was some animal cruelty, and another dog was kicked. And my mother had to drag me out of the theater because I was crying so hard. Now, I've had those experiences since I've been an adult, seeing movies, and I can talk about those movies, and I have on my podcast, the movies that have had such an impression on me. And they are animal stories and they are people stories. And there's something specific about someone suffering whose voice isn't heard. Someone who's a child who's been abandoned, a child who's been left behind, a child or an animal who in some way is being abandoned or hurt, and they don't understand it, and you can't explain it to them because they're a child or they're an animal, and you can't talk to them. So there is a thread that runs there, and it has been part of my story. So, but again, I wasn't so extraordinary. I was the kid who, like everybody else, had animal images on their wallpaper, on their bedspreads, stuffed animals in their bed. Every parent, even today, uses animal books to teach their children how to read, games to teach them how to spell, games to teach them how to count, all of these ways that we use animals in our development and learning our most basic skills, including all of the morality tales that use animals to teach us, how to be a good person, how to be a social person, how to be kind, how to be patient, whatever. And so you get these messages that animals are an integral part of your life. And what I didn't know is that I was being fed animals. And I loved meat and I loved dairy. My father owned ice cream stores. We had candy, ice cream, everything you could imagine all the time. And I did love chicken nuggets and fish sticks. And I mean, we ate kind of typical New Jersey food from the, 70s and 80s. And it was, looking back, it was kind of gross. But then I was eating it. It was ground beef and.
Right. Well, at least you didn't grow up on the shore. That would have been a level worse.
It's true. Well, it's true. It is true. It's really funny. Yeah, but we did eat it. We ate the veal parmesan. We went to the kind of typical Italian restaurants in New Jersey where there's veal parmesan and chicken parmesan, and we had beef stew, all of it. There was very little that I didn't eat, but I also didn't know. And so it wasn't until I was 19 or 20 when I read Diet for New America. And like you, I don't remember what made me pick up this book. To your point, I've always been someone who's interested in learning more and knowing more and being self-reflective and wanting to improve. And so that book compelled me I was compelled to read the book. I was also always very interested in wanting to eat healthier, and especially as I was getting older and more critically thinking about things. And so that's probably what it was, just curiosity, and didn't expect to see the images that I saw, which were pretty tame by any standards, really, but just factory farming conditions that I had never seen before. And again, to your point, he wrote about dairy and he wrote about eggs, but that didn't penetrate. I just stopped eating land animals because that was the first thing I had read and seen. And I thought, oh my God, I don't want to be part of this. So I stopped eating land animals. And then that went on for several years. I did start learning more about vegetarianism, about vivisection, about puppy mills, kind of all these other animal related, forms of exploitation and abuse. And it wasn't until several years later that I read the book that really woke me up, which was Slaughterhouse. And that book is an investigative endeavor into really kind of figuring out what the effects of working in a slaughterhouse are on the people who work there and on the animals who are obviously victims. And it was it was just life altering. It was mind altering. I was sobbing while I was reading this book. I was so struck, Howard, by the sadism that really takes place in slaughterhouses. It's not just that animals are killed, it's that we create a culture of violence. And it was that awareness that I'm contributing to people being desensitized, so desensitized that they do things to the animals that we don't want to speak of. And that was when I called my husband from LA, where I was reading this book, and said, I'm vegan. I don't know what that means, but it means I don't want to contribute to this. I don't want to be part of this. And I got home, and that was the beginning of really the story, that led me to where I am. That was 20 years ago, and immediately wanted to evangelize and tell other people what I felt that they didn't know. And if they did, they would make changes. And I think that's what's kept me so hopeful, is because I found that people did want to make the changes. And I've just been trying to fill in all the gaps for people to help them do that.
Right. It's almost like the experience that we go through is so transformational, and there's so much internal struggle. It's like I go to the gym, I lift a bunch of weights, and then I give them to you and say, here, you can lift them too now.
Right. Exactly. And I think it's very natural. And I think even if it's something like, hey, I read this book or I saw this movie and I want you to see it too, we get excited about what we discover and we want to share it. We do it as children, right? We do it as, animals do it. They bring us gifts of things they want to share. We want to share with our tribe members the things that get us really excited and that make us happy. So I think it's a very natural reaction, even though where we get into some dangerous territory is when we then become insistent or attached to the idea that everybody else should have the same reaction we do.
Right. And you go through the 10 stages. And I think I don't want to kind of go through all of them. People should read the book. It's called The Joyful Vegan. It's out, it's available. But there's a few that have sort of been sticking points for me that, give me a free therapy session in the guise of a podcast. So one of the things you take on, is what does it mean to really be vegan? and it's like the fight over the definition. So I'd love to start with your definition.
My definition of what it means to be vegan is that it's the means to enable me to manifest my compassion. It's the way that I can most easily and most conveniently and kind of most directly manifest that desire to not be part of that culture of violence. That's what it is for me. It's not an end. It's not a goal. It's not the end in itself. It's the means to the end. And that end for me is unconditional compassion versus the conditional compassion I had when I loved dogs, but was eating pigs. So for me, it enables me to manifest my deepest compassion in my behavior.
Right. And that's a high bar, right? Because that's like if you are, oh, my son's about to come. He doesn't realize that I'm on a podcast. I'm on a podcast. That was semi-compassionate. Where was I?
The high bar.
The high bar. This is why I don't go live. That when you just say, okay, I'm vegan, and you have a list of do's and don'ts and a bunch of rules and an identity, and we can, part of how I was preparing for this conversation was thinking like, we're in the middle right now of an impeachment hearing. We have an incredibly polarized world. We've got suffering on the borders. Like, it's not just, vegan, non-vegan divide. It's almost every aspect. But the minute I kind of give myself a label, join an identity group, and get reinforced for behaviors by that identity group, I'm in danger of losing the essence of what it was that I was trying to accomplish in the first place. And so, like, some of the definitions, the less functional, generative definitions of veganism that we can adopt that actually can block the compassion.
Oh gosh, that's a whole bunch right there. So which to respond to? I guess the first thing I would say is I don't see veganism as a list of do's and don'ts and rules. That for me is, I think, one of the things that perhaps distinguishes me from other vegans. I don't know, but I don't see it that way. Like I said, I see it as a manifestation of my values. That I say that I didn't become vegan as much as I removed the blocks to the compassion that was inside of me. And so I don't need a rule book. I just want to just do the right thing, right? And that's where I get really frustrated with people who do kind of focus on the rule book as if there is a vegan overlord, as if there is a rule book to follow, as if there's doctrines to follow. And I think that's where it gets really muddy. And I think that's where it's a real turnoff to people. Now, look, we do tend to look for ways to identify ourselves. This is the limitation of and the function of language. This is one of the things we do, is we find ways to distinguish ourselves from other people and also from who we used to be, right? So we do that, like that. It's a very natural thing to do. And language is limiting. It can only do so much. And so we can get into those difficulties when we become rigid about it and what the definition is. And that's why, I do think vegan means something, but if we get more attached to the meaning and the definition of what vegan is, rather than the whole reason that we want to, do it in the first place, that's where I think we can get really, we can get into trouble and we can lose the plot. So I talk a lot about identity in the book, and I talk a lot about understanding why when we embrace this particular identity can butt up against our other identities that we have in our lives, as a father, as a mother, as a daughter, as a woman, as a son, whatever it is, all these other identities, as someone who's Mexican, as someone who's Indian, as someone who's Italian, as someone who's Irish, right? These are all these identities, someone who's Catholic, someone who's Jewish, someone who's Muslim, like all these different identities then start to look like they compete with this particular identity. And I think it's one of the reasons family members become like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this to me? As if it's a statement against the identities that you were raised with, right? And so some of the journey to just growing up is kind of navigating all of the different identities. Because I don't know about you, but like I don't adhere to all of the identities that I was raised with. I've rejected some, I've embraced some, some have changed, but part of, kind of living and growing and evolving is kind of figuring this out. And I think that's why things do calm down after a bit of time once you've made this change. But we play a part in how our friends and family members and people around us react to us. We play a part.
Yeah. And I think we have a responsibility to be very intentional about our identities in a way we didn't maybe 100, 200 years ago, when we were living in cultures that had stood the test of time, right? Like if you grew up in a Sardinian village and, you had your ancestors and you had the church and you had the, your great-great-great-great-grandmother's death certificate in the family Bible, like you say, okay, well, this may not be optimal, but it works. Mm-hmm. It's sustaining, it's life-giving. In our society today, I think I feel like we're in an airplane heading straight down off a cliff towards the bottom, and everyone's going so far so good. Like we have the identities that are sold to us don't originate in anything organic.
You mean specifically in terms of kind of the political identities and cultural identities,
or even just our universal belief in money, in capitalism, in what vegan, not vegan, whatever. We're all destroying the earth way faster than it can support. And so I think, I think we live in a terrible and wonderful time where we have the opportunity and the obligation to say, who do I want to be on this planet?
Well, that's right. I mean, look, I think honestly, I think we've always lived in a terrible and wonderful time. I don't think it's unique. I do think we face some things that will have consequences that will be irreversible. And yet, since the dawn of time, there have been threats and people have thought it was the end of the world. And there's always been a time where it was up to us to look at our own conscience and make the right decision. I mean, that's why we have martyrs. That's why we have, the history of, that's why we can look back on philosophers and still apply the philosophy from 2000 years ago to today, whatever it is. So I don't know. My point is, I think we've always had to decide who we are and how we want to be in this world. And so here we are. It's up to us. It's up to us individually. It's up to us collectively. And I think that's the real test and real purpose of our lives.
Yeah. And in some ways, the stakes are lower now. If you were the one person who went against your tribe 100 years ago, you didn't have a lot of options. Now we have, you can move from Edison to Oakland. You can, I can go on Facebook and find groups. I can go to one of 35 different houses of worship within 10 miles of me. We have agency if we choose to recognize it.
We have agency, we have mobility, and I think that is something that really distinguishes us from, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, certainly thousands of years ago, and us today. We have agency, and yet, because we are so intrinsically tribal, that's what starts, we still find tribes. We still desire to find a tribe, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what, again, starts to happen kind of based on this being in our bones is that we start to we distinguish the us and not us. We distinguish those who are like us and those who are not. And this goes back to what you were saying early. I mean, that I do feel like is a human compulsion. That doesn't mean we're destined to just fall into that trap. I think, again, that's also our challenge, is to rise above it. But it does seem to happen very naturally. And when you look at what's happening in the vegan community, vegan world, plant-based world, whatever, we make these tiny little distinctions based on something so minor in order to distinguish ourselves from those who are not exactly like us. We do it in every way. It's fascinating.
Right. And I'll call myself out in terms of, I can be so judgmental. Mm-hmm. And I can, it's easy to be judgmental of the people who are judgmental, right? That's my gateway drug into it. Right. But then, I have aligned myself with the health component of the plant-based movement. And So, when sort of tempers flare, when there's an argument between, around fat shaming and certain doctors, like I feel compelled to like have an opinion and offer it. And it feels bad, right? Like in the moment, like there's this hit of like, adrenaline. I'm being powerful and I'm getting angry and I'm saying something, but almost immediately it feels bad to do it. And it feels disempowering.
For sure. It's one of the reasons why when we feel those ways, we should not get on social media. Like we all feel that way. We all feel that we're right and everybody else is wrong. And that if everybody saw the world through our lens and did things the way we would want them to do, the world would be a better place. And isn't it, we all feel that way? What a crazy world it would be if we all, that's how we all feel. And so for me, the practice of that and managing that is not to expect me to never feel that way. I am judgmental just like the next person. The question is, do I want to stay this way? And is there a way out of it? And what's on the other end of it? And for me, I think the work that I strive to do is to at least understand the other perspective, that it doesn't have to be mine, but that it's still a perspective that I don't share, that I don't hold, but that it doesn't mean that the other person who holds it is evil or bad or wrong. It's just different. And for me, that's the work that I try to do. And so I am a very opinionated person, and I share my thoughts and my ideas, obviously in so many different ways on the podcast, in my books, et cetera. As you said, I don't hold back. And yet when it comes to that kind of, when it comes to judgment, I reserve that for my journal, for myself, for my husband, for my close friends, so that I can work out with them how to get on the other side of it so that I don't dwell in that judgmentalism, because I think that is at the heart of the divisiveness that we're in today in so many ways. And again, not different than it used to be. This is not new. This is not unique. However, what is at the heart of it is just, I'm right and you're wrong. And I don't want to live there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have felt, not to deny any of my own responsibility or culpability, but when I am intransigent, I get a lot of kudos, right? Like I was on a political forum, and there was someone had posted an article, and it's basically left-wing, liberal, progressive politics, like this presidential season, like who should we support and what, and I was trying to make the case on this forum that, so I had gone down in my town of Pittsburgh. There was a Confederate statue. There was fights over, and there were protests and demonstrations. And I went to one of them, and there was a whole bunch of people in their pickup trucks holding Confederate flags. And all I could do in that moment, or all I did do in that moment, was like yell at them and try to make them feel stupid and shame them. Mm-hmm. And then on this forum, I was saying I'm ashamed of myself for giving into that. I certainly didn't make anything better. I made things worse. I didn't ask them about their own family or anything. And I started getting this barrage of pushback. Like, no, you have to shame them. They deserve it. They're a bunch of racists. Yeah. And we get this also in the vegan community. Whenever there is attempting to find common ground with others who may not be vegan or totally vegan, we say, well, let's move this forward. Let's improve the lives of farm animals, or let's move away from factory farming to humane, in quotes for those of you who are listening, slaughter. That there's this feeling that if it's not 100%, it's not worth doing.
Yeah, I remember when Bush was president, and I remember after 9/11, I remember the rhetoric of you're either with us or you're against us. And I remember really resenting that because, of course, there are gray areas, and of course, there are conversations to have. And of course, I can care about the fact that I don't want, planes to be flown into buildings to kill my fellow Americans or my fellow, human, fellow humans, while also not feel like I want to go to war against, et cetera, et cetera. And it's that idea, which is, I find ironic because I do find that, that we can all be intolerant, regardless of whether we're on the left or right or vegan, not vegan, whatever. And that notion of you're either with us or against us just doesn't sit well with me, whether it's someone whose, political ideologies I don't agree with, or whether it's someone's political ideologies I do agree with. It still doesn't fly. And so I try to be consistent. And this is my own journey, right? And I struggle with it as well. My goal is to at least get away from it. I don't want to stay there. And I think it's really unpleasant. And yet that's what we all do. I think we think that if we give any legitimacy to an opposing viewpoint, that it delegitimizes ours. I think that's ultimately what it is, that if we say, yeah, maybe that's the right way, even though I don't want to do it and I don't really agree with it, that it's somehow giving enough credence to it that it delegitimizes your own. And I think that's the worst thing we can do, because we don't give space to, oh, that's your perspective and why? Oh, I don't agree with that, but you have valid points, but that's not where I'm going to spend my energy and my time, right? Whether it's the things you were talking about specifically to the animal, movement, animal rights movement, animal protection movement, vegan movement, or if it's political, is we have to bring everything to the light to allow people to have reasons to disagree. We need to be able to have disagreement, not for its own sake, but really legitimately to kind of chew on different ideas and realize, oh, I can take something from that, even though I'm not going to live by it. It's still legitimate and I can learn something from it, even though, it's not what I want to do, because we don't have all the answers. We don't know. There isn't one way to do any of this. That's why we have so many different ideas. And that's the beauty of being in this, quite literally, this post-Enlightenment era, is that there are so many different ways to go about things. And in the world that we live in the culture that we live in, especially, to be able to try them and experiment and say, I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to do this anyway. I mean, no one has the answer. No one knows exactly what to do. And we have to be open to everybody's perspective. It seems to me, it's my perspective.
Right. And, I think of you as a tremendously effective advocate for the vegan movement. And it's not because you're good at debate, right? It's not like you have all these facts at your fingertips and you can pull out citations and studies and destroy other people's arguments. It's because you model a kind of curiosity and openness and vulnerability that then allows someone else to mirror you back. So I'm curious how you go, if you're at a party or somewhere and someone wants to engage you and they want to make you wrong and they want to ask you about your protein and don't broccoli cry too. Like what's your game plan?
So thank you for that, by the way. Thank you for that. So I often say that our conversations with people begin long before we actually have a conversation. And so I do practice each day, going into the day, having a perspective that I have the intention of sharing my story and seeing compassion in everyone, such that when I then encounter someone, then I'm called to practice that, right? So then I got to do it. And so I do practice every day on trying to have the perspective that people are good people. So that informs me.
So that's almost like, before you go run, you do a little stretching. Like you prepare, you don't just go out into the world unprepared.
That's right. That's right. So that when you then, trip, you are pliable and flexible enough that you'll be able to withstand that. It's the same idea. It's also just because you don't know what you're going to encounter. You just don't know what's going to come your way. And so if I don't have a foundation of who I want to be and what my principles are, then when I encounter someone, I'm going to be all over the place. So I'm very clear about I try to be very clear about who I am in this world and what my purpose is. So that when I'm at a party and someone says, where'd you get your protein? I hear that and I could easily say, I'm so sick of answering that question, go away. I could also decide to engage them and try to be right, or I could just be me, which is I am going to speak my truth and I'm going to, my intention is to speak for the animals and to debunk the myths about veganism. And so I like humor a lot. I really like playfulness. I like people. And so when someone says that, it depends on the situation, but I really want to get to why I don't want it to be about me. I want to get into I want them to talk about them. So I will ask them questions. What makes you think that? Or, where do you think? Where do you get your protein? Or what do you think? Or, whatever it is. Or I might, kind of use my, the problems we have are not, the problems of deficiency. The problems we have are problems of excess. All of the problems we have to do with excess, not deficiency. Or I might say, really, have you ever heard anybody who had kwashiorkor? And they're like, what? And I said, kwashiorkor, it's the scientific term for protein deficiency. We don't have kwashiorkor in this country, but we do have heart disease and all these preventable diseases. So I'm having a conversation, but I'm also exploring what their thinking is, and I'm being playful. Sometimes you don't have to say anything at all. All you have to do is just kind of laugh and say, really? And they'll go, why, have you heard that before? You probably heard that before. Yes, I've heard that before. What makes you think we don't get protein? Well, you tell me. Draw it out of them, make them accountable for things they say, and have a conversation. So that's just kind of how I go about it. I genuinely like people. I genuinely think people aren't coming from a bad place. I think they're coming from a place of certainly ignorance, and I don't mean that in a judgmental way, but I mean literally not having the information. But also, I think people just don't know what to say sometimes. So they kind of say the first thing that they have heard, and then if you pressed them, people who say, like, what about the animals? We'd be overrun if, we stopped eating animals. They'll take over the world. And I might say, really? Like, really? Do you really think that? And then go, no, but still. So just kind of just being present with them and just having a conversation. I don't know, seems to work. And to your point, I appreciate that you perceive me as being an effective advocate. I mean, it's like, how do you measure it, right? Because I don't measure it by the number of people who have become vegan from my work, right? Mm-hmm. I don't quantify it that way. I do measure it by how I am and how I feel and what I model. And that, I think, is what I try to impress upon advocates is it's not about, I don't take the credit for people becoming vegan from my work, just like I don't take the blame for people not becoming vegan despite my work. I want to model compassion. I want to give people the tools they need, and the rest is not mine. And so my measure of effectiveness is not how vegan I am or how, if someone becomes vegan, it's how compassionate I am and how I can model compassion.
Right. And that's such a beautiful perspective, across the board. When I've come to now teach people about how to be healthy, very, very often people are measuring their success by what happens in a year or 5 years, or I gained 5 pounds, or my A1Cs didn't go down, as opposed to, was I myself in this moment? Mm-hmm. And, this dance with our own best self and our authenticity, that if, was I a good vegan today? Well, I had a little bit of too much Miyoko's cheese today. So, I may have gained a pound, so I'm not as good an advocate. Opposed to like, did I eat the Miyoko's cheese in a cheerful, loving environment? Or was I sort of like self-medicating because I was procrastinating a podcast episode? Like we have really tender and sensitive and right-facing GPSs within ourselves.
I love that. That's beautiful. Absolutely. And it's the same measurement. It's, am I manifesting my values of ... What are your values? What are your ethics? What are your principles? Even if it's compassion and self-compassion, am I manifesting that value of self-compassion by, like you're saying, like, having, eating too much? What's happening that I'm eating too much? Is it because I'm not being mindful? Is it because I'm trying to cover something up? Is it because whatever it is, right? That doesn't mean you're a bad anything. It just means, are you truly manifesting this compassion that you say you want to have for yourself, or whatever it is, the health that you want to achieve? Is this in pursuit of that? That's the barometer, not, am I a good vegan? Am I a bad vegan? Like I said, I don't aspire to be as vegan as I can be. I aspire to be as compassionate as I can be. That's the difference between how I perceive veganism and how others do.
Right. And one phrase really stuck with me from the book, and I think it was part of your story about standing at the fence between was it the dove hunt and the farm sanctuary, and thinking, like, and the phrase was something like, I saw these men as vessels into which I could pour my compassion. And I could just imagine being there, with literally at your back, the vegan world, and then just sort of standing and like, how hard would that be to fake or to be stoic about non-judgmentalism, and how easily would that leak if you weren't consciously working on compassion?
That was such a pivotal moment for me in my own journey as a human being, not just as a vegan, just as a human being. Because even when you were, like, I purposefully didn't cross my arms. Like, I purposefully had a stance that was open. And I literally had a mantra that I just said all day long. And believe me, there was a lot of temptation to undo that and to say, you son of a, right? I mean, so many times throughout the day. And I I didn't want to be that. And so it's something that I think about so much still. And it's what I try to practice, like you said, whether it's someone who just thinks differently than I do, politically, whatever it is, but it's a conscious decision, and I didn't accomplish it that day. That was the height of my practice, or the most challenging, example of that practice. But I tried to practice it every day, and I fail most of the time.
Right. So one thing I'm really curious about, you didn't name the book The Sustainable Vegan, the Resilient Vegan, the Persistent Vegan. You named it the Joyful Vegan. Why?
I have always identified as a joyful vegan. I have always tried to convey that aspect of what I love about being vegan. And so it just made sense. And I want to also abolish this myth that to be joyful means to be ineffective or, not vocal or not an advocate. That there's this notion that in order to be effective, you have to be angry, that in order to be an advocate, you have to be angry. And I do count myself as someone who's very active, very vocal. I'd like to think I'm effective. And yet I do consider myself a joyful person, vegan. And so I wanted to, just convey that. And so there's going to be people who don't pick up that book because they might see it as an oxymoron. Yeah. Or they might not want to aspire to that because they might see it just as fluff. They might see that's not going to do any good. We can't be happy while there are bad things going on in the world. And I try to hold the perspective that you can be both, that you can recognize that there are a lot of things wrong with this world, but there's a lot of good in this world. And I want to be part of making it better, but I'm not going to be miserable in the meantime. And you don't have to be that way either.
Right. Well, I'm going to push you a little bit, though, because I understand why you want to be joyful, but the subtitle is How to Stay Vegan in a World That Wants You to Eat Meat, Dairy, and Eggs. So there's something to me about choosing joyful that's not just, I like being joyful and it's better than being pissy, but there's something about being joyful that will allow you to stay vegan whereas strident, angry, judgmental, other words wouldn't.
For sure. So, and also don't forget there is the word vegan in there too. So just how to be who you are, hold your values in a world that's really butting up against them all the time. And so there's a lot to say around why people stop being vegan. And that's really why I wrote the book, is because I know that there are challenges for people, not only in staying vegan, but staying joyful. And so it's not just about, so of course I'm saying, stay vegan, but it really is also about stay vegan, but stay vegan joyfully and effectively, but also stay vegan because there is a risk that if you become so overwhelmed by how bad things are, that's all you see in this world, that you identify your feeling bad with being vegan, that you're going to stop being vegan. So there is an element of our joy dictates how we live in this world and how much we can sustain our values. Because if it doesn't feel good, what's the point? Right? Now, there will be people who still do it and stay vegan because the point is to help animals or the point is to be healthy or whatever it is. But my point is it doesn't have to feel bad in order to accomplish those things. So yeah, there's a lot to say about that. And there's a lot to say, bringing it back to your early question about identity, around how we identify and how we see ourselves and what we call ourselves also has an effect on whether we stay vegan or not. So yeah. I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting that you chose the word joyful and not happy.
I think it's very different. Yeah.
What's the difference for you?
For me, I think joyful is something that is just a rootedness and a contentment that is more sustaining, versus happy that I feel is more fleeting. I feel happy is just, is kind of a fleeting feeling, but that doesn't mean your core is happy. Joy for me is your core essence, versus happy, which I feel like is temporary. Because
the way I've been thinking about it, I came across this philosopher, I think his name is Brian Masumi, who defines joy as the feeling you get as you're growing into your potential.
Oh, I like that.
And so it's like you can be joyful even, there's this beautiful photo of you kissing a cow on the cover. Like, even if that cow dies and you're mourning, there is joy in a certain kinds of grief, right? Because if you'd never known the cow, you could, right? And there's joy in walking home after opening your heart to the dove hunters. And feeling like, yeah, I was true to myself.
Right, because I wasn't happy. That wasn't happiness. I could still feel joy. And I think it's a beautiful way that you're putting it, because I could still feel joy in that moment. I could still feel that essence of kind of manifesting who I am. That doesn't mean I was feeling happy. And so, yeah, it's holding all that is this world and all that we are and all the complexity and all the bad and the good. For me, is you can hold all that and still be joyful. And that is Linus on the cover, and he's a boy, he's a steer, and Linus has died. And I can hold that. I mean, he was such an incredible being. And I remember that every day, and seeing his picture and seeing his face reminds me of his essence and how much he affected me. Even though he died, which is sad, I can still hold both of those emotions at the same time. And that's what I try to convey. That's what I try to convey.
Right. And you mentioned earlier, and you talk a lot in the book about the power of telling our story as opposed to lecturing. Because people can argue with your facts. They can come up with different, the hectares of CO2 emissions are better with the grazing, but they can't argue with your story. And I think, and the counterpoint of that is that we have to be willing to accept other people's stories. So one of the things that bothers me the most about the orthodox vegans is, and I discovered this first at a vegan blogging conference in 2013, I think, is this idea that ex-vegans have somehow betrayed us. They were never really vegan. And all these, 20-year-old blonde bloggers were just starving themselves. And so, and they'll say, like, I didn't feel good eating a vegan diet. And we're like, yes, you did.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, it's maddening. It's maddening because in denying that, it's kind of like, look, this is maybe not the best analogy, but it's the one that just came to mind and I'm going to keep going with it. It's as if, a book that I recommend to everyone is Nazi Doctors. I mean, it's the idea that every single person who was involved in the Holocaust was a monster. And my feeling is that no, they were really human. And that if we deny their humanness, then we're denying that part of ourselves that has the potential to do really horrible things. That it's actually that we're human that enabled us to do that, not that we're monsters. And so if we deny that someone had a difficult time or actually was joyful, really enjoyed being vegan, and then they stopped because they wanted to eat meat, dairy, and eggs. If we deny that that is actually the truth for some people, then we deny that part of ourselves that has the potential to stop being vegan. And I think that's part of what happens too, is that we want to brace ourselves against any possibility that we would have to face not manifesting these values for whatever reason, because we wanted to, or because of health reasons, or whatever. And so everybody else's story isn't even our business. I mean, that's really the point in all of this, is that this is just my story. It's my journey. And so I'm going to tell you mine because I know that you're going to see yourself in my story. And from that, you'll do whatever is the right thing to do for you. And I know you will. And I trust that about people. And that's why I have never said in the 20 years I've been a vegan advocate, go vegan. I have never said, go vegan. Not subtly, not directly, not in maybe in a hashtag, right? But not in a way in terms of my advocacy, because I don't have to tell people what to do. Once I tell them my story and they see themselves and they start reflecting on their own values, they know what to do with that. They know I don't have to tell them what to do. So yes, I think you're right. And we have to hold people's stories and not be afraid that it's going to threaten our own, not be afraid that it's going to delegitimize our own, and let people have their story. When we delegitimize them, I think we delegitimize a part of ourselves.
Right. I think there's a lot of projection going on, right? Like if I'm in a really great relationship and someone tells me they're having a breakup, I don't need to, I don't have to go, no, stay together.
Right.
Right. Like if I'm on the verge of breaking up, then I'd have that energy.
Absolutely. That's a great analogy for sure. And it's fear. I mean, I think it is fear. I think it's ultimately fear of the tenuousness of a decision. I mean, this is a decision. This isn't, I didn't get struck by some magic and now I'm this, and to not be that would be to defy it. It's a decision I make every single day. So I just would rather we worry about ourselves and not worry so much about everybody else.
Yeah. I'm just leafing through the book looking for this part. Like there was one part of the book that made me cry, and it was a line, and so it was in this sidebar of like the something vegan says this, the joyful vegan says this, and I mean I'm reading it. It's like it reminds me of like the High Holiday liturgy, like a prayer book. But the last one was, and I'm blanking on the parallelism specifically, but the last one is one group sees evil, the other sees fear. Like the joyful vegan sees fear. And like that really got me in the gut. I was thinking about, the Confederate people that I was berating, thinking about every time I just want to destroy someone in an argument, every time I just want to take away the right to vote from certain people. It's like, yeah, everything that I see as evil is a manifestation of fear. And that is a faith-based, I can't prove it, right? It's got like, that's got to be like a prime postulate, something that comes before the philosophy.
hmm Right. And absolutely. And so in me thinking differently, where's the benefit? Like you
Mhm.
people, to your point about the people on the podcast you were on would say that's not true. They're just horrible. They're selfish. They don't care. They want to destroy everything. And you can hold that view to what end? And if I hold the view that says they are afraid that they haven't been represented, they're afraid of everything they've ever believed being disintegrated, they're afraid that everything they've ever been taught has been wrong, they're afraid what's going to happen to me and to my family and to my belief system if I stopped doing this, right? And so still the answer is, well, to what end do I feel that way? Well, it certainly gives me a much kinder perspective. It doesn't mean I condone it. It just means that I see them through the lens of compassion, which enables me to say, I'm so sorry for that. That makes
Mhm.
me so sad rather than they should be condemned. Because there are effects of both of those. I mean, to what end? Well, to what end is, literally the mob, which can destroy a lot. The mob is a dangerous thing.
Right. And, and just practically, if I have to go to war with them, they've got all the guns.
Well, that's true.
Like, just Sun Tzu, like, no, don't do that.
Right, for sure, for sure.
Right? Like hunters versus vegans, let's use words.
Right. Let's use the same tools.
Yeah. Right. So, one last question, and then I want to get your contact info for folks who want to follow you and learn all about it. But this is a question I've just been having so much fun asking people lately, and it's apropos of nothing we've talked about. What's some music that you really love that means a lot to you that you think other people don't know about and should?
Oh gosh. Oh, I'm one of these people who listens to the same piece of music over and over again, especially for different things I'm doing when I'm writing. So I think I closed it because I wanted to make sure we had a good connection. I love let's see, Max Richter is a musician I absolutely love. I do love, kind of just this melodic, no words, just this kind of rhythmic gets me into this
Hmm.
space. And his work is incredible. Um, Oh God, who am I listening? I've been listening to. Oh, I love the Dirty Three. Same thing. The Dirty Three is incredible, and you just get into this rhythm in your head, and you just lose your heads. Like you're just focused on whatever you're doing. At least that's what it does for me. And the Dirty Three is Warren Ellis, and he plays with Nick Cave, and Nick Cave is one of my favorite.
You're the second Nick Cave person in 3 weeks.
Really? Oh, he's the best. He's a master. He's amazing. He's just an artist in the true sense of the word. So yeah, Warren Ellis is he's his collaborator
All
and
right. Well,
incredible. Yay.
yeah, I just started listening to him. The first line he sang was, "I don't believe in a interventionist God." I'm like, oh my God, that's pop music.
Yeah, he's a poet.
Yeah,
He's a
awesome.
poet.
Okay,
But
well,
I know,
great,
but I know,
Max.
darling, that you do, and that's one of my favorite songs. And it says, what do you say? I don't believe in angels, but looking at you, maybe I do.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yes,
incredible.
beautiful. So how can folks follow you, find you, and bring you into their lives?
Thank you for asking. Going to joyfulvegan.com is probably the easiest. Right now, that's really the main site for the book. But if they want my main website, they can get to it from Joyful Vegan. And I'm
Okay.
only saying this in this long way because my name, ColleenPatrickGoudreau.com is my main website, but you
Uh-huh.
can get to it from joyfulvegan.com.
Great. So fewer chances for spelling errors there.
Exactly.
Uh-huh. Great. So what's on your to-do list for the next year?
I'm in the middle of working on that. I'm actually creating my plan for the year. I've been working on it. I really want to keep getting Joyful Vegan out there. I am really excited. I have a TEDx talk this year. I've been aspiring to do that for a long time, and it will be on our words and expressions related to animals. So that's a big one. That's going to take a lot of time. Looking forward to speaking more and continuing the podcast. And I've got other books, but I really want to just kind of focus on the content of the Joyful Vegan and really just go deep with that. And then I've got many other things to do.
Yeah, great. Well, the Joyful Vegan, I think, is an infinitely deep dive because it requires courage as well as skill, right? So it's cultivating something that we can't consistently have to renew.
Can I quote you on that? Can I use that? That's just
all yours.
That's just perfect. I think absolutely. And we can learn, we can cultivate courage, and we can learn the skills. And that's all I ask of people, is be willing to cultivate the courage and be willing to cultivate the skills.
Beautiful. Let's go out on that. So Colleen Patrick Goudreau, thank you so much for everything you do, for this wonderful book, The Joyful Vegan, and for taking the time to talk today.
Thank you so much, Howard. Thank you for all you do, and thank you for having me on your show. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
All right. Hope to meet someday in person.
Me too. Okay. Take care.
Bye. All right. I hope you will get a copy of The Joyful Vegan. And also, if you enjoy this episode, reach out to Colleen on social media and let her know what you thought of the conversation. You can check out the show notes for today's episode with links to her book and her website and other stuff at plantyourself.com/370. Oh, and Colleen has a podcast. It's been going for a really long time. And if you're into plant-based podcasts, and why are you listening now if you aren't, you should check that out. And you can get to that from joyfulvegan.com and also from Colleen Patrick Goudreau.com. Sorry about that, Colleen. And from the show notes here, plantyourself.com/370. No garden news to speak of. In running news, did a good 10 on Saturday, and on Sunday I was stretching and pulled my back out again a little bit. So it was either too many miles or too aggressive stretching. Either way, learned my lesson yet again, and will cool it down and wait and take my time and spend more time with self-care than the kind of stretching I started doing, which was sort of like seeing how far I could bend myself into various shapes, which kind of looking back feels like the opposite of self-care. All right, thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song Sabali Dawn, The Dance of Peace. Check out willridenauer.com for more of his beautiful music. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Mauro, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Christine Nielsen, Tina Sharp, Tina Ahern, Jen Volkanovsky, David Bizek, Michelle X, which is, they say, the mysterious Michelle X, Elizabeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Andrew, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Rhymes with Circus, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Janet Selvig, Claire Adams, Tom Franzek, Jeanette Benham, Gil Lisser, David Donahue, Blair Seibert, Dorona Vizov, Gio and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesen, Ruth Ann Funderburk, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, the equally mysterious Tracy Z, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Linneman, Rhymes with Cinnamon, Nick Harper, Steph, Martha Bergner, Susan Amon, Molly Levine, the inscrutable Harry R., Susan Laverty, the Pagan, the Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Scharf, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Kelly Machia, Deanne Norton, Bonnie Lynch of Plant Happy Oregon, Sabina Kurtzels, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Koppel, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Shannon Hirschman, Linda Ayat, Holm Hedegaard, Isa Tuzan Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Olakowski of Plant Power for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Morani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Tanya Lewis, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, and Jesse Cheryl Dwyer. Jenny Hazelton, Valerie Peltier, Peter W. Evans, Colleen Harrison, Justine Divitt, Joshua Sommermeyer, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Lori Fenney, Linnea Lundquist, Valerie Hummel, Emily Iconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan McCorney, Stephen Leenan, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Cart, Stian Bishop, Bill Riel, Gunter Schmidt, Marjorie Lewis, Kelly Molden, Tricia Adams, Ian Kramer, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunn-Marie Hagen, Tracy Gulledge, Laura Heaton, Meg from Amistez, Michelle Kennedy, Diana Goldman, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, Holly Butler, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sarah Robertson, Paran Ganchi, Amy Daly, Brian Turbin, and Barbara. Just four to go. Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, and Karen Schmidt for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for today. See you again on Friday for a Friday Fertilizer. And as always, be well, my friends. So if you appreciate the Plant Yourself podcast and would like to help support the mission of the show, there's a few easy ways to do it. One is to just go to wherever you get your podcasts and leave a review. Let other people know about it. Give us some stars, give us some love. And that really helps us be found by more people. Something else, of course, you can do is let someone know about this podcast. Someone who you think would benefit. Send them maybe a couple of episodes that you think would pique their interest, or just ask them to subscribe in general. And third, you can join arms and become a patron, a financial supporter of this show. You may have noticed that there's no advertising in the show, and it's free for everyone, and it's supported, paid for by those who can afford it. So if you would like to make a one-time contribution or an ongoing monthly pledge, you can do so at plantyourself.com/gift. All right, time for thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenhour for allowing me to use his beautiful song, Sabali Dawn, The Dance of Peace. You can find more of Will's music at his website, willridenhour.com. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Maurer, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jean Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Christine Nielsen, Tina Sharp, Tina Ahern, Jen Filikanovsky, David Vizek, The Mysterious, Michelle X, Elspeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Andrews, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Rhymes with Circus, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Janet Selby, Kara Adams, Tom Franzek, Jeanette Benham, Gil Assert, David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Torona Vizo, Gio and Carol Argentati, Jody Friesner, Ruth Ann Thunderberg, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, the equally mysterious Tracy Z, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Linneman, Rhymes with Cinnamon, Nick Harperson, Martha Bergner, Susan Ahmad, Molly Levine, the inscrutable Harry R., Susan Laverty, the Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Scharf, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Kelly Machia, Deanne Norton, Bonnie Lynch, Plant Happy Oregon, Sabina Kurtzels, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Copel, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Shannon Hirschman, Linda Ayat, Holm Hedegaard, Isa Tuzawa, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Orlikowski of Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Morani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Tanya Lewis, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, and Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Valerie Peltier, Peter W. Evans, Colleen Harrison, Justine Divitt, Joshua Sommermeyer, Dennis Berg, Darmy Kelly, Laurie Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Valerie Hummel, Emily Iaconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan McCorney, Stephen Lehman, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Kartz, Deanne Bishop, Bill Brielf, Gunter Schmidt, Marjorie Lewis, Kelly Molden, Tricia Adams, Ian Kramer, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunn-Marie Hagan, Tracy Gullich, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Rochelle Kennedy, Diana Goldman, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, Holly Butler, Diana, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Param Ganchi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, Karen Schmidt, Pamela Hayden, Emily Perryman, Olga Sidorowska, Allison Corbett, Richard Stone, Lauren Vaught of Edible Musings, Aaron Hasty, Sean Owen, Sagar Nayak, Erica Piedra, and Danielle Roberts for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for today. As always, be well, my friends.